psychosexuality nerd with a background in psychology and a 24/7 lifestyle kinkster. Here on the Erotic Realm, we delve into the depths of erotic psychology, unpacking the mysteries of desire, the stories that shape our sexuality, and the unique ways we connect with ourselves and others. My mission is to create a space for introspection, education, and open conversations that not only challenge how we think about eroticism, but also humanize kinksters by sharing authentic stories and insights into their lives. If you enjoy what you hear, don't forget to follow the show and leave a rating. It helps more people discover the erotic realm. The following is a conversation with Lenny, a classical pianist, composer, writer, and longtime BDSM mentor whose erotic philosophy blends pain, hypnosis, and the deeper psychology of desire. Lenny describes himself as a sadist who makes love through the medium of pain rather than the medium of sex, a perspective that challenges traditional ideas of intimacy, pleasure, and connection. With decades of experience exploring non-physical orgasms, hypnotic states, and the philosophies of the Marquis de Sade, his approach to kink is as intellectual as it is visceral. As a writer and literary thinker, Lenny has explored dark eros, power exchange, and the psychological depths of BDSM through his work. His writing, like his play, delves into the fine line between consent, surrender, and the limits of human experience. In this episode, we explore the intersection of pain and pleasure, the untapped power of the mind in eroticism, and how BDSM can go far beyond the physical. We also discuss unconventional fetishes, including a garlic fetish, the psychology of masochism, and the shift in landscape of the kink community. Get ready for a deep and provocative dive into the world of erotic hypnosis, dark desires, and the role of writing in shaping the erotic mind. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Erotic Realm Podcast. I'm so excited to have Lenny with me today. It's a pleasure to have you here, Lenny.
Oh, the pleasure is mine, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Of course. Now, normally I dive straight into your erotic realm, but I've had a request from some of my listeners of the podcast, and they want me to get more of a feel for the person outside of their kinky world before we get started, which I actually think is a great idea, as I feel it's important to highlight that kinky people are everywhere in our society. So I've added a new regular question into the podcast format, and I'd love to know, what are your interests outside of kink, whether that be your general work area, if you're happy to share, or your hobbies, or both? What are you up to when you're not being a kinkster, Lenny?
Well, which is most of the time these days. First and foremost, I am a classical pianist and composer.
Amazing.
A fair amount of my music has been published, and I will be performing again, apparently, on a chamber music series in May, which is, I'm getting a little long in the tooth, but I'm looking forward to that as well. I also teach English. As recently as last fall, I was teaching at a college in the Boston area, Boston, Massachusetts. And then I am, in addition to that, a writer and sometime editor. And at one time, I also practiced hypnosis and Reiki and trigger point massage professionally. So I've led a kind of multifaceted professional life. And my interests, in addition to kink, include chess, and particularly some of the chess variants in which I've been involved. Actually, my first book was co-authored with a chess grandmaster, so I had a lot of fun with that. And I very recently did another one, totally fiction, called Sherlock Holmes and the Mysteries of the Chess World, which was another enjoyable project. And then I was also at one time very involved with both well, I call it football, Americans call it soccer, and then the indoor variant, futsal, which I think is a fantastically great game. So, yeah, I had a lot of interests outside of that. And, I guess you could say I'm a college professor, published author, published composer, concert pianist, professional alternative therapist who also happens to be kinky as hell. How's that?
That's fascinating. Thanks so much for sharing, Lenny. It's so interesting to hear the other side of what people are up to. So now let's get into your sexuality a little bit more. If you had to sum up your sexuality, how would you describe it?
Well, first and foremost, I'm perfectly capable of enjoying vanilla sex.
Mm-hmm.
However, my temperament is kinky. I am a sadist, albeit a rather unusual one, in that I am a proponent of so-called pure play, which is to say, play without sex. I almost have to say I prefer that to the sexual dynamic as well as the kink. I'm very happy to play with masochists generally after we've established some sort of basis of friendship, once we are clearly in sync with one another. However, I have been most fulfilled on those few occasions in which I've had the pleasure of giving women orgasms from pain scenes. And indeed, I can say we made love through the medium of pain as opposed to the medium of sex. And this is very powerful intimacy a few times, with a few people. All of these were relationships that lasted for a while. I also engage in psychologny, which is the process by which one can give the other person, and since I am heterosexual, the woman, orgasms without any physical contact whatsoever. This is done either through verbal suggestion. I use hyperimperia for that. And also so-called chakric energy play, which for whatever reason on FetLife they call chakra energy play, but chakra is a noun, so I prefer chakric. And then finally, I've got a number of fetishes, many of a literary or some almost theatrical nature. I enjoy reading more poetry, although sometimes also prose, to naked women. And I've actually had women orgasm from listening to various marvelous works of poetry, not erotic at all. I mean, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot, there was one woman who not only orgasmed, but she was also in tears. So go figure. I have found myself with women, and I have to be honest about you, these weren't things that came to my mind. I was sort of led into them. One woman wanted to be fingered in a church. Another wanted to be fingered in a graveyard. I mean, the list goes on. But something of that sort, just because it is such a theatrical moment. The sheer depravity of the scene or the setting itself is immensely stimulating. And I really enjoy that also. So that kind of is a brief overview. Oh, I also list a garlic fetish, but, we can go on and on. I'm sure you realize. I mean, a fetish is anything that's used as a fetish, but my primary kinks then, psychology, obviously sadism first, psychology, and something theatrical or literary.
Wow, there's so much I could ask you about. The last fetish that
Well,
you mentioned,
right ahead.
the last fetish that you mentioned, I didn't quite catch it. Did you say it wasn't garlic, right?
I did say garlic. Garlic,
Okay.
yes.
What do you mean by that?
Believe it or not, garlic can be a fetish. In fact, I've posted a few times on that subject. One of the ways it occurs is just almost, if you will, in a sort of mild SM dynamic. I can remember once I had a guest over who liked garlic. We got some pizza. I took an entire bulb of garlic and started to run it through, peeled it and all, and we just ran it through the garlic press and buried that pizza with raw garlic. And we ate and watched one another. And all of a sudden, her hand went up and she smashed the kitchen table and screamed, "Water, water!" And I did go up and get her the water, and I was immensely stimulated sexually from that. Now, that's a rather bizarre fetish. I did know a woman who was very much into church fetish, and she wanted communion. Well, I will leave it to your imagination as to how she received the sacrament, and it wasn't the wafer, it was the garlic. So, things of that sort, they were all a lot of fun. Again, it's just the dramatic or literary intent of it all.
Yeah, you've mentioned the theatrical aspects of BDSM a few times. Can you speak a bit more to that? Why is it the theatrics that particularly appeal to you?
Well, I think it is probably because of the fact I have such wonderful love of the theater, which was basically sort of planted in me by my mother at an early age. It was taking me through Shakespearean plays and then later Greek tragedies, and we would go and watch them. My father, of course, who was the musician, shared with me some of the operas that derived from Shakespearean plays. Verdi wrote Otello, Macbeth. He wanted to do a King Lear. That never happened. The Merry Wives of Windsor, which is based on Falstaff. So, the opera is Falstaff, and it was based on the Merry Wives of Windsor. So I had this wonderful early association. I still love the theater to this day. And if something is dramatic, something is fit for the stage, and now think theater of the absurd, think UNESCO, think people of that vintage, it can appeal to me immensely. It will definitely appeal to me. That's how I'm wired.
So what was your first kink experience like? Did that have a theatric component to it as well?
Oh, no. I think my first involvement with kink was straight SM. And in those days, everyone started on the bottom, which I think is what should happen now, because people need to taste the lash before they apply it. But I began as a masochist, which I found, by the way, very enjoyable. However, I gradually moved to the top. And then after a time, I just lost the desire for the masochism and became a sadist.
So what year was this that you were first experiencing masochism?
I was experiencing that before I was 21. I was, I would say it was probably in 1968, but before my birthday. Yeah, I was 20. So we're very close to 60 years.
Incredible. So you spent a long time now engaging with and also analyzing BDSM. Looking back, what do you think are the deepest psychological drivers that draw people to kink, especially sadism and masochism?
Okay, that is a very tricky question. And please understand, I'm not a clinician. I have read a great deal about this. In my opinion, the association of love and pain often, but not always, triggers the masochistic instincts. For example, my great passion as a child was music. However, when I did not practice well, my father would punish me. And by the way, that went from spanking to slightly worse to the belt and the strap and whatnot. And so here you got this beautiful art form, music, which I loved. And my father, whom I love to this day, although he's long deceased, of course, and the association with pain. And I think that drove me in the direction of masochism. However, the anger and resentment that began to accrue may very well have caused me to switch first and then flip. I don't know. I mean, it's not that simple. Look, you have children who are completely abused in horrible living circumstances, and they don't grow up to become masochists. In fact, they don't grow up to be at all. However, many masochists whom I have met have exhibited this behavioral development. For example, I had one friend who loved to ski. That was her great passion. And she ended up with something like 15 different fractures at different times. I mean, almost every time she went out skiing, she would break a finger or break this or crack ribs or whatnot, until eventually she just decided, hey, it's time to quit. Well, she quit downhill. She went to cross country, which was a lot easier. But that association, I think, may have influenced her psychosexual development. Again, I'm not a clinician, and I'm talking off the top of my hat here, but it's something I've been observing for over 30 years. And the greater majority of the masochists I have known had that fairly early association. For whatever reason.
Yeah, there's often debate about whether masochism is about pain or surrender or something deeper. What do you believe masochists are truly seeking in their pain?
That is a dangerously loaded question. Okay. Well, I mean, I think we have to differentiate fairly early on between the DS. I mean, you did mention surrender, domination and submission, and sadism and masochism. The relationship between the top and the bottom is different than the relationship between the dom and the sub, in that one behavior involves pain and the other involves the illusory control. That control is, again, I think, something that gets at least the form, it begins to form probably before puberty. And again, I've spoken with many subs, and it seems as though they have these recollections of being held down, or, you know, basically being in some sort of a submissive position from early on, and it seems to have been something they enjoyed. Now, why they enjoyed it, that I don't know. I mean, I've played the dom role. I never considered myself a particularly good dom because my orientation is different. And to be honest with you, I don't recall ever having responded to being a dom, whereas as a top, I mean, I've definitely responded. There's no question in my mind whatsoever that it's stimulating. The other is not. So it's difficult to say what causes the surrender, the submission. Now, we're in very gray area, and this is more, I think, semantics than psychology by far. If person A is the sadist and person B is the masochist, and the masochist wants the pain, which the sadist wants to administer, but would you say that the masochist submits to the sadist, or would you say effectively they're both fulfilling what the other wants? That is a very tricky question.
Well, I think it could be either or depending on the situation, right? I think both can happen.
Yes. Let's take another one. Let's take even the simplest form of bondage. When I was a dom, I couldn't understand bondage unless people were, you know, really getting into bondage play. But if I were the dom and I told the sub, assume this position, if she wants to please me and she wants to obey me, then she will assume that position. End of discussion. When I have played, because I'm not an extreme top by any means, there hasn't been any real need for bondage, but I have known the extreme masochists. I met a woman who, and I ended up borrowing her for one of my novels. She was a very minor character. This woman had branded labia.
Okay.
Oh my God. Now, please, I never saw the day that I would be able to do that to another human being, whether out of love or hatred. That, there are lines I can't cross, but that's what she wanted. She had to be tied. She said, she was completely rendered immobile. And as she quipped afterwards, it's a good thing I was, because if I'd been able to move even my head, I would probably still be orgasming. This was several months after the incident. That's how she was wired. If you can explain that to me, please do, because it's so far over my head. Needless to say, we did not play because, she had heard I was a sadist. I said, no, you are so far out of my league, you would find me horribly disappointing. But that was the level that she wanted. Look, I met a guy who liked getting whacked with a baseball bat wrapped up in barbed wire.
That's intense.
Well, again, it's intense, but it's also something I could not do.
Yep, this is the fascinating part about sexuality, right? We're all so different, and you've had decades of experience now, and you're still saying that you don't understand certain things, and it's just fascinating how it's an endless source of wonderment, really.
But that's the whole point. We are different.
Yes.
And I think it's monstrous for anyone to claim he actually understands kink. I understand, I may understand. That's debatable. The small little niche within the kink world where I feel comfortable, but then there are people who are doing so many things with which I have no experience and no understanding whatsoever. Different strokes for different folks. And the other great line from that Clint Eastwood movie, a man has got to know his limitations.
Indeed.
I think it's true of women also, and non-binary, and you name it.
Yes, we all do.
We all do.
I wanted to bring up a quote with you today as well, and it's also highlighting the topic we've been speaking about. It's from one of your favorite writers, Marquis de Sade, and he famously wrote, "It is always by the way of pain one arrives at pleasure." So we've got into this a little bit, but I wanted to ask you a bit more about it, given your deep understanding of sadism and masochism and these psychological aspects. Do you think pain is inherently tied to pleasure?
I think that it is for some people, but the tricky thing here is you are talking about the Marquis de Sade. Sade's name was ultimately lent to sadism, even as Sakhar Mazok was lent to masochism. The problem is that in his novels, the relationship is not sadomasochistic at all. He has a dynamic in which there are the libertines who do whatever they want, whenever they want, wherever they want, and the victims. And essentially what's going to happen is the dynamic that the victim screams in unspeakable agony and the libertine discharges in orgasm. And that's true of his male libertines and female libertines as well. So it's a little bit different for them. And several of them have these comments. I think particularly in Juliet, where I forget which character it is, says, mine is a very advanced stage of depravity. I'm incapable of enjoying myself at all unless there is pain. And so you're really in a different world here. I think that the Marquis, however, does set up that comment with an earlier one, in which effectively what he says is that the logical culmination of the sexual drive is the criminal act, where I think you'll agree that to inflict pain non-consensually on someone is, most of us would consider that criminal. Well, his characters hold that as an almost sacred aspect of their sex drives. In order to be a good person, I must become a criminal. And in fact, when Juliet has a slight lapse and doesn't quite want to do something, she is afraid it's a little bit too cruel, she gets into trouble with the minister Saint-Fond, who is one of the most remarkable characters in Sade's canon. So it's very, very tricky. That the quote itself is interesting. Would you repeat it again?
Yeah, sure. It is always by way of pain one arrives at pleasure.
Yeah. So I think that's in some ways all-encompassing. Many of the characters will ask to be flogged. The libertines themselves, they want a good flogging. They need the pain just to get the ball rolling, but then they have to inflict the pain in order to reach a state of arousal at all and ultimately to orgasm. So that was, I think, how Sade, I think that's what he meant. I think that's the inference behind the remark, all of which is preceded by this logical culmination. And of course, I mean, if you look at vanilla people and then you look at outright villains, for Sade, the villain has a much more developed sex drive. Is that really too far-fetched, though? I want to ask this as a sober question, and maybe your listeners will be able to chime in on this one as well. Let's look at people we consider horrible for the crimes they committed. Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun, I guess you could put up there. The Romans with some of the tortures they had, the scourge, crucifixion, whatnot. Hitler, Stalin. I'm sure there are many people who would point to Trump or Putin or this one or that one. I don't want to get into all the political machinations here, but Sade would say, how could, or I'll just take the Nazis, how could Hitler and his colleagues have designed these concentration camps? How could an officer serving in the SS have served there, or even the Wehrmacht, have served as the commandant of that camp unless it stiffened his prick? And that is a question that gets raised repeatedly in some of Sade's literature. As far-fetched as that might be, because I'm talking things, well, World War II was slightly before my birth, but let's look at a fairly recent development. I'm sure most of your listeners have heard of the M23 group in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They went into Goma. I assume I'm pronouncing that correctly, perhaps it's Goma. Women were raped. Then their wing of the prison was set on fire. Children as young as 1 year old being raped. To Sade, this is beautiful because he believed this must have stiffened them. I don't know how to explain. Again, I'm at a complete loss as to how anyone could do anything that evil. But the point of the matter is we know that human nature is capable of this level of evil.
Yep, it sure is.
And, is evil to be something we need to consider when we talk about SM? To me, SM is a totally loving, consensual exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, Sade himself is writing about this extreme world in which these horrible things take place. And isn't he telling us about our world today? So it's a fascinating topic of discussion. I mean, we could probably hold a whole program on the good old Marquis.
So I'd like to get more into Sade later. We've spoken quite in depth about pain, but you've also explored a range of fetishes beyond pain, including non-physical orgasms, hyperimperia, and spectrophilia. Can you please share with us what each of these are and what you like about them?
Okay, hyperimperia, I guess the simplest way to understand it is to think of the opposite of hypnosis. The hypnotist begins to bring the subject down deeper and deeper. And if I can switch into hypno voice without running any great risks over the media here, they first of all speak a little bit differently. So you say, relax, deeper, deeper. I'm not going to go on any more than that, but you get the idea. A subject who develops good rapport with the hypnotist will eventually become so relaxed that the person slips into a mild trance or sometimes a very deep trance. At the deepest levels, people undergo surgery without anesthesia, although only a very few people can reach those depths. But the principle is that one is more open to a suggestion if the suggestion is agreeable. Hyperimperia is the exact opposite. Instead of bringing the subject down, the therapist brings the subject up, higher and higher. Soon you will feel and you will feel more. You will see and you will see more. You will hear and you will hear more. And the more you hear, the more you want to hear, and the more you see, you want to hear, and so on and so forth. Voice becomes a little bit more animated. And two things emerge. Hyperimperia was discovered, and the term was coined by Don Gibbons, who is a retired psychologist himself. His PhD was actually in experimental psychology, but he also practiced. And he found that hyperimperia enhanced creativity. Well, for someone like me who composes music and writes, this is wonderful. But the other thing he discovered is that it enhances sensual pleasure. If you have a favorite food and you're given hyperimperic suggestions, you may enjoy it a little bit more. If there's music that you very much enjoy, you'll enjoy listening to it more, and so on. And then, of course, in one of his lectures when he was teaching, some wiseacre student raised a hand and said, could it enhance sexual pleasure? Well, my dear colleague, being the type of researcher he was, he found a number of volunteer subjects, and he went with straight couples and gay lesbian couples and a group and individual masturbators and so on. And he found that uniformly they were responding more. They got more pleasure from the orgasms than they did without the hyperimperic suggestion. Well, the beautiful thing that was going to happen was the accident. I was in this rather unique situation. A friend of my wife's was divorced. She had started another relationship, and maybe she was just nervous or whatever. Anyway, things weren't going all that fantastically well for her in the bedroom. So she talked to my wife, and my wife said, well, maybe it's just that you're nervous. The hypnosis will help you relax. And so anyway, we got together, and I said, well, if it's sexual responsiveness, maybe hypnosis isn't what you want. Maybe would you like to try hyperimperia? And she said, sure. So try to imagine this scene. She was stretched out on the reclining chair, and I was seated in maybe 3-4 feet away from her. Of course, both of us fully clothed. This is in my office. And I began giving her suggestions of greater pleasure and greater arousal. And, the more turned on you are, the more you want to be turned on, the more you feel, the more you want to feel, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, her breathing changed. Right there in the office, she had an orgasm, which I think I was probably more embarrassed and awkward about it than she was. So at any rate, upshot of that, she went home, had another 16 orgasms.
Oh my goodness.
And the boyfriend called me up the next morning and said, Lenny, whatever you did with her, please do it again. And so, and we all had a good laugh about it afterward. But that's, I think, exactly what can happen. Again, it's a small percentage of the time, but people are capable through hyperimperia of just reaching the orgasm by suggestion, not even by command. It's just let it happen, and it will happen. And it's fantastic when that happens. I mean, it does occur occasionally, and I've always enjoyed it. I had some great subjects over the years. Several of them just loved it.
And what about spectrophilia? What's that about?
Okay, spectrophilia is something very, very different. I encountered that quite by chance, and I actually I wrote the definition of spectrophilia that appears in, I forget the precise title of I can actually look it up while we're chatting. It's an encyclopedia of sexuality. And I was approached by a woman who had been told by someone else that I was involved with psychology, with giving people orgasms without any contact. And she said she thought she had such an experience and she wanted some validation. So we chatted for a bit. And spectrophilia, by definition, is sexual experience with a ghost or some other non-corporeal entity. And I was very, very skeptical about it. Then I heard this account. What had happened is that she was very, very close. She had a wonderful relationship with her husband, who was some years older and died. And then they had a cottage out in the woods. And apparently there was a certain time before the black flies got in, they could go outside naked. At any rate, one time she was just awakened in the middle of the night, and it was his voice telling her, well, it was hot enough that she was sleeping in the nude anyway, just telling her, go outside in the backyard. And she felt this presence penetrating her and bringing her to orgasm, exactly as he had when he was alive, when they were a dynamic couple. And she really felt his presence. Now, I don't want to open up a can of worms and discuss the existence or non-existence of ghosts. I remain skeptical. But this is the only account I have ever heard with which I had to ask, is it possible? Was it a dream? No, because she said, she was acutely aware of things. She said, I was not dreaming. And she mentioned, she was able to feel the dampness of the grass. She could see the moonlight. She was aware of a slight chill because, it was not that warm outside when she was completely naked. But she sensed his presence and penetration. Is it real? Is it not real? I don't know. But I will say that one did make some sense, and I do believe it. Or at least, as Hamlet said to Horatio, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. Yeah, that's where I am. There are things here that are too complicated for me to fathom, and this is one of them. So I told her, no, it's not hyperimperia, because nobody gave you a suggestion. And if you weren't dreaming, I mean, because obviously people have sexual dreams. I don't dispute that for a moment. But she said, no, I was not dreaming. Not at all.
Fascinating. Thanks for sharing. And yeah, it's important to stay open-minded with these things, but also skeptical. So I think you've got a healthy balance there. And,
Thank you.
We don't know everything. So who knows what will happen in the future and what we'll find out. Now, I'd like to get back to the non-physical orgasm, because today's article is actually diving into this. So there was this study titled "A Case of Female Orgasm Without Genital Stimulation" that examined the case of a woman who, after tantric training, developed this ability. And the study actually explores the neurological and hormonal responses that she had during these orgasms, demonstrating that the brain and body can access pleasure states in ways that go far beyond traditional assumptions. And it suggests that orgasm is not solely tied to genital contact, but is a whole body experience, potentially triggered by focused mental states, breathwork, and sensory stimulation from other parts of the body. So given your extensive experience, Lenny, with non-physical orgasm and orgasm without physical touch through erotic hypnosis, I can't think of a better person to help unpack these findings. And I'm curious to hear your insights on whether these non-genital pathways to orgasm are something you're facilitated in your experiences, and what this means for how we understand pleasure and the erotic mind. So a few questions based on the study. Neurologically, they found that even without genital contact, the participants' orgasms activated the same pleasure centers in the brain as a traditional orgasm. What do you think this tells us about the power of the mind in erotic experience? And how does it relate to non-physical orgasm?
The short version of the answer is simply that the mind is the most powerful sex organ of them all. But I don't think any of this should be too surprising. Okay, we know that this was a woman, of course, so we know the clitoris can induce orgasm. We know the G-spot can. Okay, some women are very sensitive labia. That's wonderful. But how about the women who orgasm from breast stimulation? Okay, now we're getting a little bit out of the genital area. Then you read about these very unusual people. We're all familiar with the foot fetishist, and we assume that that's really the man who wants to worship the woman's foot. And there's this beautiful metaphor of how the foot fits into the shoe as the penis penetrating the vagina and all that. But I have also encountered the woman who told me, now I did not play with her myself, so I did not see this, but I don't think she would have been lying to me. The woman who orgasmed from having her feet worshipped. Okay, so we're getting even farther away from the genital area. Until finally you have to reach the point, well, do we need any physical contact? It's a big quantum leap, I'll grant you, but isn't that orgasm actually occurring in the brain? Perfect justification for that statement is if two people feel no sexual attraction to one another, it's pretty difficult to have anything resembling satisfactory sex. Okay? If a person attempts to masturbate but isn't imagining some sexual fantasy at all, he or she can rub until the flesh is raw as hell, but nothing's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You can't induce that without the brain's involvement. So I think what this study was probably trying to teach us is that the brain doesn't need the body. The body may need the brain, but the brain doesn't really need the body to achieve that effect. Mm-hmm. Let's go back years and years ago. I believe it was in the 70s or early 80s. They did some research with monkeys, and they were able, through brain stimulation, to induce orgasm and ejaculation in a male monkey just through stimulating parts of the brain. So, I mean, they're not going to be attempting, they're not going to anesthetize a person and start sticking wires into the brain to experiment like that. Well, we hope they won't. But yeah, I believe, of course, the brain is the most powerful sexual organ, and as such, it will invariably be able to achieve these types of effects. I think much more research is needed. Can everyone do it? If not everyone, then what percentage of the population might be able to do it? And then what percentage would do it if it were in a non-clinical setting? I mean, there were so many variables here. We don't have the last word, but I'm sure that the study is quite good. I believe I read something similar, but that was about 2 years ago. Is this study that you're citing was much more recent?
No, this is from 2022, so it might be the same one.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah, I probably read it shortly afterwards, so it could have been even 23. Yeah, that's probably the study I read.
So I wanted to ask you about tantra, because it mentioned that the woman developed this ability through her tantric training. And you mentioned earlier about chakric play. Have you incorporated that much into your BDSM play or other erotic practices? And if someone wants to start to do that, what suggestions would you have for their starting point?
This is a tricky one because I am not tantrically trained. For example, there's the new tantra, the TNT group. I believe they're based in Denmark, where they do a lot of work with that. And I've spoken with quite a few practitioners. I've met a number of them who have gone through the training there. I think there are 9 levels. I think the 9th level is the last stage. And I know someone who has gone there. Effectively, the tantric training is bringing sex way beyond sex. So in other words, we're not speaking about the clitoral orgasm for the women. We're speaking about perhaps a womb orgasm. Very, very different type of thing. You asked also the question about where would I recommend people start? Well, for energy work in general, if one starts with something like an introductory Reiki course, just the level 1 is enough, and maybe incorporates into that a little bit of Qigong, just very simple exercises through which I guarantee you anyone can feel his or her chi. I mean, this is such a mind-blowing concept. I mean, I remember I went through it myself. I said, yeah, this energy, ki, the Japanese say ki, the Chinese say chi, but, what is it really? And then suddenly I could feel it generating in between my hands. Wow. And feeling is believing in this case. People can do that really superficially. It's not a major commitment of time. Honestly, the Reiki 1 course is usually taught in 1 day. 1 afternoon, I think 4 hours or something. And the Qigong thing you can learn in 15 minutes. And what you can find is that by learning how to channel these, you can induce orgasms. By the way, you can induce them on the male as well. The only issue with inducing it in the male is that men tend to be very inhibited about it because of the fact that they end up with a mess on their hands, where the women, if they don't squirt, can usually tolerate it a little bit more easily and, then just retire and wipe themselves delicately. But yes, absolutely, that can be done. And it's more difficult. For example, I've done Hyperimperia very successfully using Skype or Zoom or Google Meet or all sorts of media of that sort, whereas I've had limited success trying to do remote Reiki and chakric energy play to induce the same thing. Even looking at the subject on the screen, it has been very, very challenging to do that. Requires much deeper concentration. Whereas live, I mean, hey, lie down on the massage table and, give me 15 minutes and it would be pretty easy to do if the person is that responsive.
That's great advice. Thanks for that. A last question about non-physical orgasm now, because it also seems to open up exciting possibilities for people who may struggle with traditional sexual function due to age, disability, or trauma. Have you thought about this application before?
No, I haven't, and I have to be very blunt with you about it. There is an ethical issue here. I am not a licensed clinician. So while I do these sorts of things, I would almost call it recreationally with friends, I have some general inhibition about trying to present it as a therapeutic medium, simply because very often there are underlying neurological issues involved, and I am not qualified to treat them. I did work with my wife's friend because that was just so obviously a case of probably either nerves or other inhibition. So it was, a slightly different thing. And I've worked with a few other people in similar types of mode. But yes, particularly as people age, there is a diminution with men that begins pretty early on. And of course, women can keep going 60s, 70s, and beyond. And, men, it's a little bit trickier. I'm starting to get ready to write that great book, Sex in Your 90s, with the subtitle Coming While You're Going.
I love it.
That's my next project. No, but the male drive diminishes with age, more dramatically so than the women. I mean, for a woman in her 60s or 70s to have, let's say, 4 orgasms is not at all unusual. A man without the benefit of some pharmacological agent, well, he can have one. That second one is going to be a stretch. And, it's a little bit more challenging.
Well, as part of our conversation today, I also asked you to bring along something to share, such as a quote, book, or a movie that has influenced your sexuality. Can you share with us what you've brought along today and how it shaped your understanding?
I could respond with 2 books and a movie. I mean, they can. First of all, I have to point to the Marquis de Sade, and to me, his quintessential masterpiece is Juliet. My own character, Simone, I wrote. The title of the novel is Simone, a sequel to The Story of the Eye. The Story of the Eye is Georges Bataille's masterpiece. Simone channels that eponymous heroine in some ways. I should state that she has much more depth. Juliet, like most of Sade's characters, is really two-dimensional. Juliet is pure evil, whereas Simone is capable of friendship. She's capable of love. She has some sense of human decency. She's capable of mystical and spiritual growth. without Sade's Juliet, there would have been no Story of the Eye by Georges Bataille, and without that, I would not have written the sequel. So that's very much so. He influenced me philosophically. The notion of what the pure libertinage, the pure cruelty, it was very sobering because it showed limits to sadistic instincts. And I do believe in freedom, but I don't believe we can have freedom without limits. Mm-hmm. And of course, there are Sade's characters all having freedom with no limits whatsoever. Also has certainly influenced my political perspectives and interpretations of the world. There was a character in one of my novels who is broken on the wheel. I don't know if you know that method of execution. It's really ghastly.
Yes.
And one of the characters, one of the living characters who is hearing this story, quips, I have no doubt the Marquis de Sade would have loved that tale, you know. So, yeah, I'm sure that was also part of the influence. The Story of the Eye by Bataille, I've already mentioned. It's so rich in metaphor. It's literature. It's not pornography. It's literature. Look at the climactic scene with the priest in the church. Simone has mounted him in the church, and her unnamed, the unnamed narrator and her mentor, Sir Edmund, are strangling him. He dies as he has his orgasm. And then right after that, she has Sir Edmund cut out the eye, which she stuffs into her vagina. Wow. I mean, how much can you say? You know, they've got the bull's testicles at the bullfight scene, the egg, everything about this. It's so rich in metaphor. Simone takes that and applies it to the prisons of Mussolini's Italy and Franco's Spain. The same character, just as she grows older. And then finally, Pasolini's final film, Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom. And it's loosely based on Sade's 120 Days of Sodom. I was so impressed by how easily Pasolini adopted Sadean libertinage and applied it to fascism. Fascists there who make their victims eat excrement. They set genitals on fire. They gouge out an eye. Well, gee, I wonder where that came from. The scalping, everything else they're doing there. It's just a marvelous metaphor, and it shows that Sade is relevant as the genius of Pasolini was able to put on film. So, yeah, it's any of those three would answer your question.
Thank you for sharing such fascinating topics. And you've spent years analysing de Sade, and I wanted to ask you, because I know people often take his fiction for fact. What do you think is the biggest misunderstanding about de Sade and his work?
I think most people are unaware of the history of the man himself. For example, how many know that although he was an aristocrat, because he had been in the Bastille, he was rehabilitated. He ended up sitting in on one of the citizens' tribunals and got himself into a lot of trouble with Robespierre, who was the architect of the Reign of Terror, because the Marquis de Sade was opposed to the death penalty, if you can believe that. There are so many interpretations of why he wrote what he wrote. He didn't make a lot of money, but I believe he wanted to immortalize himself through his writing. And if you get right down to it, he certainly did. I mean, how can anyone deny that? He did precisely that. And, you know, it's it's amazing. Of course, his 120 days is incomplete. I don't know whether anyone would ever want to finish it. And yet it was so interesting that Georges Bataille wrote, it towers above all other books in that it represents man's fundamental desire for freedom that he is obliged to contain and keep quiet. That's why Sade called it the most impure tale ever written since the world began. And I was so flattered because someone said my novel, Simone, is the most vile tale written since 120 Days of Sodom. Now, what's interesting is there's a very famous quote by Roland Barthes, in which he said, I don't know whether I should poison the airways with my rather wretched French. Écrit de mer ne sent pas. Written down, shit doesn't smell.
Yes.
What he's really saying is that as we read Sade, we are able to read about these things about which we would otherwise be too inhibited to think. We all have those aspects, those behaviors latently within us. No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously, someone may disagree with me, but I think we all have a certain curiosity. What does drive the human animal? How vile is this species?
Now, some argue that de Sade was the first sexologist, documenting human desires without moral judgment, and others see his work as purely transgressive. Where do you think he fits in the history of sexuality?
I would certainly agree with the former statement and disagree with the latter. I think he does look at it without moral judgment. In fact, I'm going to go a step further. He makes a morality, but his morality is twisted. I think he believes that that is the nature of things. And of course, the other beautiful thing, which is again from Juliet, he has the character Saint-Fond. Most of these people, as you can imagine, laugh at the concept of God. Saint-Fond believes in God, but he tells us people have it all wrong. God isn't the good and the just and the beautiful and the loving. He's the greatest pervert of them all. And I went even further with that in one of my novels, which is called If Music Be the Food of Love. No, it's Paradise Regained and Lost Again, I think it is. I don't even remember which title it is. It's in the second or third volume of the series, in which my narrator effectively says, yes, I'm a pervert and don't blame me, blame him. Pointing up at the sky, meaning God. And of course, Sade is saying if you really want to be virtuous, you must act like God. And since God is content to have earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and war and all kinds of things that cause unthinkable suffering, then we must inflict suffering upon our victims. That is depravity on steroids. I mean, the man was insane, but he was a genius. And I really think he did look at our sexuality and looked at the basest side of it, but didn't want to make a moral judgment. I mean, if you are kinky, Sade doesn't look down on you, he applauds you. You have good taste.
Yeah, and I think the other thing people have to remember as well is that he wasn't living in a so-called normal time. It was the French Revolution, right? And he was, from my understanding, he could see people being beheaded on the guillotine from where he was sitting, imprisoned. Yes. So, that's going to do certain things to your psychology as well that we can only guess at. We can
never know. I mean, exactly what. And of course, the the great tragedy for him is that he had hidden the scroll on which he had written the 120 days. He had tucked it into the wall, and he was rescued when they stormed the Bastille. But then the Bastille was torn down, and he said he wept tears of blood because he knew that he would never see that manuscript again, and somehow or other it survived and, has been with us again starting in the 20th century. But yes, that's a very good point you've raised there. I agree.
I'm not clear. Did he see it again in his lifetime, or was it found?
No,
he didn't.
No, absolutely did not ever see that one. Well, his works were often burned. I mean, Napoleon wanted to have him executed at one point. I mean, no one is going to claim that Sade was exactly the picture of mental health. I mean, I don't know whether anyone would claim that I'm the picture of mental health. Sade was definitely, way out there, but I think he teaches us so much about ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned that you've written your own literature inspired by authors such as de Sade. What did writing Simone, for example, teach you about the psychology of desire?
Simone was a great challenge. I have to tell you, because she starts at age 14 as an exhibitionist for Sir Edmund, who is a voyeur. And you would say, well, okay, it's a little, we have Lolita already, we've done that number with Nabokov. But from there, she goes on to more and more adventurous things with him. And then eventually she discovers that he's also into SM. And the SM is, of course, consensual and loving, but then, of course, she goes more and more deeply into it. And eventually, they end up in the prisons of Italy and of Mussolini's Italy and Franco's Spain, and they really have some remarkable fun. They meet all sorts of fascinating characters. And by the way, the Spanish part of that was all outlined by Bataille himself in the story of the eye. She ends up running into the abbess, and she does her thing there. But I worked in other elements, and in developing the character, I thought that Simone would eventually become bored. Now, we saw this in Bataille's story of the eye. She gets bored very easily. Whatever they're doing, she has to do something more, or she will lose interest. And I thought, well, what better way to take sadomasochism than to experiment, because it's never been done in literature before, autosassinophilia and erotophonophilia. Now, what do these terms mean? Autosassinophilia, if you think auto, self, assassin, it's to be killed by one's lover. And erotophonophilia is the other side of that. If there's someone one truly loves, the ultimate way to express that love is by killing him or her. The abbess had only one orgasm in my novel, which was when she killed her own daughter. And then, of course, so many years pass and she meets Simone, and they hit it. There's just such a connection. And when eventually the abbess ends up mortally wounding Simone, Simone has an orgasm. The abbess has an orgasm. And you say, could this possibly occur? I don't know, because I've never met anyone into autosassinophilia. I understand they have very, very short lifespans. Mm-hmm. So I mean, you don't have too much sex after you're on the other side of the grass. Well, unless there's such an affair as spectrophilia, which I don't know about. Um, I thought it was absolutely fascinating. And to what extent, how deeply can one love? And can one eventually simply become bored by making love through whatever means? And that was what I wanted to discover. And this actually all came to me in a dream, well, in a series of dreams. And I realized as soon as I was having these dreams that they were involving Bataille's heroine, Simone. And I said, wow, I've got to write this book. Hey, what a colossal labor of love. I mean, so much work involved for so very, very little pay, but what a blissful experience. I mean, I enjoyed it so much. And actually, people who have read it told me in some ways it may be the finest thing I ever wrote. I don't know, but I'm certainly not able to give an objective appraisal on that. But one can take one's desires, in my case, let's say sadomasochism, and apply them to so many other aspects of life. And one can channel them even creatively. I mean, this novel could not have been written by a vanilla author. If I had been vanilla, I could never have handled it. There's no way I could have done that. But, you know, I think it's just an important concept to realize, yes, our kink is part of our psychosexual makeup, but that includes the psychological side as well as the sexual. And it can be very, very helpful and beneficial for us also. So, yeah, I hope I've answered your question. I don't know.
You have, thank you. I wanted to ask because you and Sade have both written about extreme forms of dominance and suffering, yet your work as a sadist emphasizes ethical consent. So, how do we separate the literary exploration of dark desires from real world BDSM ethics?
Well, first of all, I should explain, only 5 of my novels involve kink at all. And 4 of them are in the series called The Passion of Elena Bianchi. And that is totally loving, consensual sadomasochism, which is quite, that is, if you will, that's Lenny writing about parts of his life. Simone was a different project altogether. So would you repeat the question, please, just so I can focus better?
That's okay. I was just asking because you and Sade have both written about extreme forms of dominance and suffering, yet your work as a sadist emphasizes ethical consent. So how do we separate the two? The literary exploration of dark desires from real-world BDSM?
Well, because one can write about things one has no desire to do. Mm-hmm. And moreover, I mean, to me, there is such a clear distinction between dark desires and loving consensual SM, BDSM, call it what you will. Mm-hmm. I don't see a contradiction there. I mean, is it possible I would write another novel that involved kink? Yes. Is it possible I would ever write anything like Simone again? No. I mean, that was just my one foray into this. And that was because, you know, I was moved to this by the dreams I was having. I mean, I don't dream in visual images because I have aphantasia. I'm not able to see images. I dream either music, pure sound, which some of my own compositions then end up using that thematic material, or storylines, which are almost again dictated to me in the dream. And so, well, that's what I have to say. And yeah, so it's a little bit different. But then again, I mean, now you can almost catch me in a little bit of an inconsistency. If I had another set of dreams that pushed me back into the direction of the Marquis de Sade, might I want to write about it again? I don't know whether I would or would not. I doubt very much that I would refuse to if I'm prompted by it like that. So it's a little bit tricky. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing, again, is that I want to know more about the darkness within me. Mm. Well, obviously, I've never set people on fire and, done things like that. But in fact, really, I'm not even particularly extreme as SM. I mean, I'm clearly a sadist, but there are many tops who are far more brutal than I. Mine was that, if I can parody, I think it was President, I don't remember which Bush, I think it was President Bush 43, the kinder and gentler sadism, if you will. But yes, does that mean that the darkness isn't there? Isn't that darkness in all of us? Mm-hmm. I mean, potentially. But on the other hand, there's also the playful side of it. So, we have to kind of look at it that way as well. And believe that I have made good use of the playful side. So, had a lot of fun.
It definitely sounds like it. Now, one of the traditions on the podcast is asking a question sourced from one of our listeners. And today's listener question is, what have you fantasized about that you haven't been able to try yet?
I have to confess that at age 77, I think the only thing I haven't done, and I'm not really in a hurry to try this, goes back to our earlier conversation in spectrophilia. I would love to know, if I'm a ghost for even a short while, would I be capable of making love to a mortal woman whom I loved? I can't think of anything else, because I've done what I've wanted to do. I think there's really very much left. I mean, hopefully at this age, I mean, I think my adolescence should be pretty much behind me. It's that beautiful term. They say, well, I'm experimenting with BDSM. I think my experimentation has gone a little bit, beyond that level. But yeah, it's a tricky one. The other thing I'd like to do, and I'm just starting it now, but I'm trying to learn how to use kink to handle some of the not so pleasant aspects of my life. And it has been helpful for me, but I'm not sure. I mean, I just don't have quite enough experience. Let me give you one example, because I was just reminded of it during our last break. I'm going through radiation therapy, and one of the side effects is very painful urination. It's the condition is called radiation cystitis, and it's perfectly normal, and it will clear up a couple of weeks once it's over. The radiation therapy is over, but right now it's unpleasant. Now, I can go into the smallest room in my residence and grit my teeth and moan or cry out in pain, which I end up doing to some extent anyway, or I can enjoy it. Isn't it wonderful? I get to bottom for the radiologist. And do you know that actually makes it much easier for me to get through some of the unpleasantness and physical pain that I experience? So, yeah. Now, what is the potential of that? How much more of that can we do? And how I don't think there's any of this in our medical or psychological literature at the moment. If there is, it certainly is not anything I've ever seen. So think about that for a moment. I mean, yes, it can be helpful. It can be beneficial.
Is it because it's giving you a sense of control, that reframing? Is that what it's
Well,
about?
actually, this is one where I've had to give up control. I guess you could
Mm,
say I'm the sub or the bottom, the
you're
masochist,
surrendering.
one or the other. But if one must remember, okay, very interesting with DS, who is actually in control?
Mm-hmm.
The sub gives that control to the dom.
Mm-hmm.
The sub can also take that control away.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So therefore, who is the one in control here? I mean, there's a little bit of a paradox.
Mm-hmm.
I find it amusing and intriguing to say, okay, if I am going to go through this pain, let me say that I am subbing or bottoming, but that's my own choice.
Mm.
And suddenly I can make it enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say erotically enjoyable. It's much too painful for that. Um, but yeah, it's just a cycle. We all play head games of one sort or another with
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. How many times have you heard students have to psych themselves up to study, or athletes have to psych themselves up for a game? Well, this is the same sort of thing. You have to psych yourself up for treatments that may not be all that pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something here, and I don't know what it is. I mean, I'm much too inexperienced. I've never done this before. I'm doing it for the first time now. It's my virginal experience, but that's probably something else I'd like to explore a little bit more fully. Well, I'd rather not have any more cancer in my life, so if I can help it. But
Yes.
I'd like to learn more about this, perhaps work with other people, see if it can help them
Mm.
manage the experience more,
Mm-hmm.
I won't say pleasurably, but they tolerate it more easily. Is there a therapeutic aspect involved here? I don't know. It would be interesting. But the spectrophilia is definitely, that's something I'd love to do. I think what you'll do is you look at a kink like age gap 50 plus. Cast me as a person, forget daddy issues. I don't want to be the daddy dom. I want to be the grandfather. And I'm going to have this probably, well, let's make it definitely explicitly non-sexual. We'll use the word relationship in quotes, maybe with some play thrown in, with this woman who's 50 plus years my junior. And then eventually, if nature follows the normal course, I shall predecease her and then make love to her afterward. What a concept. I mean, it's who knows? You may have just inspired my next novel. Who knows?
Oh, fascinating. Well, yeah, keep us up to date with what you're up to.
Oh,
Um,
you'll be among the very, very first to learn what's happening there. But
thank
yeah, it's
you.
wild. It's just appeals to me. Again, it's that dramatic perversion, if you will, but it appeals to me. It's
Mm.
interesting.
I'd like to tap into your wisdom from the lifetime of BDSM now. You've been a sadist and mentor for decades. What are the biggest shifts you've seen in the BDSM community over that time? And do you think we're moving in a positive direction?
I hate to interpolate a downer here. What I saw that was troublesome to me began with the release of 50 Shades of Grey.
Mm-hmm.
I think that 50 Shades of Grey, and okay, with all due respect to E.K. James, Erica Mitchell, whatever you want to call her, um, she admits herself that she has no experience in the scene whatsoever. This is total fantasy. And, I can use stronger words. However, I think it made the idea of kink cool, to use a good American adjective. Now, you want to be cool. I want to be cool. We all want to be cool. So what happened is that a lot of people began flocking to, well, sites like FetLife, or before that, Collar Me was more of the dating side of that. Okay,
Mm.
now that's well and good, except many of them weren't kinky. And I think we saw a fair amount of that. People who were engaging in tolerably kinky activities who weren't really enjoying it. It was all a facade. And then no sooner, and let's be blunt and sexist about this, it was far more, when I use a word like predators, it was almost invariably the men. The men began to figure out, oh, I can abuse this woman, only it won't be called abuse because I'm going to say, well, I'm a domly dom. I can do whatever I want to you. You're my sub. You have to put up with it. No understanding of protocol, no understanding of consent. And then, of course, the worst element of all were the people who, I guess for want of a kinder word, I'll say the psychopaths, who also began to start worming their way into the scene as a result. Now, we read about the Canadian TV guy, Jean Gamache, who was obviously kinky, but certainly didn't have any use for consent whatsoever. And we thought, well, that's an aberration. I have, however, throughout, the last 20 odd years, I've been teaching much of that time at various colleges, adjunct faculty, but I've enjoyed it a great deal. A number of the students, for whatever reason, would end up writing essays or just coming to my office and talking to me about it, which, by the way, got me rather nervous on occasion. But I found out that they were in kinky relationships with people who had no idea what they were doing, and they were getting abused. I'll give you one horrible example. I had a student who had perfect attendance, A's on every paper, exam, whatnot. And then one day she missed a class. Well, big deal. So she missed a class, showed up the next class. It was a Tuesday, Thursday. She missed the Tuesday. She showed up Thursday. And then she asked if she could see me in my office afterward. I said, sure. She wanted to explain the absence. Her domly dom had been doing a beating job and ended up wailing away over the kidneys. And she ended up urinating blood. And instead of going to my class, she was stuck in the emergency room of the hospital. And was going, okay, now, I'm not saying that accidents can't happen, but this guy didn't even know there are areas one never hits. And I had to scratch my head and say, how in the hell did this young woman, kid was 21 years old or something, how, and very bright woman, how was she able to get into this type of a dynamic, which to me would have been unthinkable, say, 50 years ago. It wasn't part of the scene. And I think it was that 50 Shades of Grey. She wanted to be cool. The boyfriend certainly thought he was cool, and the rest followed. When I talked about starting on the bottom, yes, even with things like the flogger and learning how to do different motions and learning figure eights and learning with paddling how to strike upward as opposed to downward, all of these little things, working with a whip for the first time and being told by my mistress, take your shirt off. Those days we didn't have the luxury of a heavy bag from the gymnasium. She had a potato sack stuffed with rags. And the deal was, if you don't know exactly where you're hitting, that little whip may just swing all the way around and end up hitting you. And you learned control. You didn't play with someone until you could demonstrate that you had that control. And now you see people using toys that they've never used before in their lives. And again, I think this is a new phenomenon, let's say within the last 15 years or so, maybe 15 to 20 years. I don't like it. I really wish things were a little bit different, because when stories of this sort arise, there is a lot of pressure on all of us. We're all considered scum to begin with. I mean, let's be honest about it. So that's the danger I see. And think for a moment that people aren't worried, in this, particularly in this enlightened American culture, people are more worried about someone being kinky than they are about the environment or the economy. I mean, it's got to get our priorities straight, which is, by the way, how I lost a couple of friends. So, you know.
Do you have any ideas of how we help change the current environment in the community to remedy some of these issues you see coming from 50 Shades of Grey?
I think people like you, who are running this wonderful podcast that really presents information that can help educate people. And I think also the people who go around speaking, the people who educate, are really the hope for the rest of them out there. And I will hope that this type of thing isn't considered too intellectual. To me, it should be almost obligatory. But yes, I'm profoundly appreciative of your podcast and other such ventures and lectures and presentations that actually teach. And I know some fine people within the community in my neck of the woods, northern Massachusetts, southern New Hampshire, who are doing precisely that. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, education does seem to be the key. So thanks for highlighting that. Now, Lenny, what would you like people to receive from listening to you speak about your erotic realm today?
What would I like them to
receive
I missed that.
From listening to you speak today?
Receive.
Yeah, what would you like them to get out of hearing you today, hearing your story?
I suppose, number one, I mean, there's just the very matter that I am a person who has plenty of other things in his life than kink. And I am not unique. I mean, I have met doctors and lawyers and college professors and other people who are certainly educated. And by the way, I suspect even a couple of people within the clergy who are kinky. And so, yes, we're not all these thugs who ride motorcycles and wear leather type of thing. I mean, let's avoid the stereotype. I hope that I can encourage people to read, particularly great authors like Georges Bataille, Sade, and people of that sort, and just read and reflect. There's so much substance in this material, above and beyond the atrocities that Sade describes or the absurdity that Bataille describes in the story of the eye. There is so much more. And those, I think, would really be the key points. I mean, if they're interested in me personally, I'm easy enough to find, but I'm much more concerned about whether people will just become better educated. I mean, so much of it is free and available online. I mean, my God, you can get a copy of the story of the eye for free online. You can download, I think, with the exception of Juliet, I think most of Sade's major works, Justine, Philosophy in the Bedroom, 120 Days of Sodom, and some of the lesser works are all available free PDF downloads online. I think I've forgotten her name, I'm blanking on it, the author whose clinical study I downloaded and read, the one I liked so much from your earlier podcast, that's available for free.
Mm-hmm.
online. So yes, there's so many things which people can access.
Thank you, Lenny. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you would like to speak about or share with our listeners today?
I don't really think so. I mean, if people are interested in reading Simone,
Mm-hmm.
they merely Google Simone, which is Simon with an E, so the woman's name, and then a colon for the subtitle is a sequel to The Story of the Eye. And it's available on Amazon. It's cheap. Um, and from there, they can obviously look me up and Google me and whatnot, and send me hate mail and anything else that's appropriate. Well, you laugh. Uh, there was my series, The Passion of Elena Bianchi,
Mm.
involves classical music and kink. Well, guess what? A lot of classical musicians happen to be and have always been kinky.
Mm.
Mozart. I mean, how many people know that Mozart had a shit fetish? Okay, let's it goes on and on. Okay, but uh, at any rate, I had a friend who called up and had read the book, and he said, "Well, you write with such depth and authority about music. You describe the performance, you describe the competition, you describe the chamber music. It's really amazing. You write with such firsthand knowledge about music." I said, "Well, thank you very much. With all due respect, I am a concert pianist, although I'm more a composer these days." He said, "Yeah." And there was a little pause. He said, "And then you write with such depth about that other stuff."
Mm.
I said nothing. And he said, "Is there something else I should know about you?"
Mm-mm.
And, I was a little annoyed. I just answered glibly, "Ask me no questions and I'll tell you no lies."
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Okay." We hung up shortly thereafter. He and his wife cut me off, dropped me like a bad habit.
Oh dear.
Now, why? Because anyone who reads the book knows that, a fair amount of it is probably autobiographical, and anyone who is writing about some of these things is probably not vanilla.
Mm-hmm.
That's just one of these unspeakable things. By the way, another person um, basically sent me a hate email and said, "Well, this is unspeakable filth."
Oh dear. Well, I'm sure that a lot of my listeners will be really interested to read your work. So thank you for pointing them in the right direction.
Or the wrong one, as the case may be.
I wanted to ask you, Lenny, before we go, if you could sum up your sexuality in just one word, what would that word be?
Eclectic. And, the beautiful thing about eclectic is that it's both a noun and an adjective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's absolutely the right word. It describes me to a T. I am an eclectic, and my tastes are eclectic. For the benefit of anyone who isn't familiar with it, um, deriving ideas and style, even tastes, from a very broad range of sources, and an eclectic is one who derives ideas and styles or tastes from this diverse group of sources. And that's the best word for me,
Mm-hmm.
either adjective or noun, eclectic.
Makes
Yes.
sense to me. I'd like to thank you for being so open and sharing yourself with me and our listeners today, Lenny.
Well, I would like to thank you. You are an absolutely marvelous hostess, and I just am so in awe of the wonderful work you are doing with this podcast. And I hope devoutly that it serves the purpose. I hope your platform just grows and grows and grows.
Thank you
So,
very much, Lenny. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm Em, and this
pleasure
has
is all
been the
mine.
Erotic Realm Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd love it if you could follow the podcast and leave a rating or review. Your support means the world to me, and it helps the Erotic Realm grow and reach more people who may benefit from hearing the inner world of fellow kinksters. I'd also love to hear from you, my listeners, if you have questions you'd like me to ask on the podcast, want to be a guest and share your story, or if you're ready to explore your erotic realm one-on-one with a coaching package, head over to theeroticrealm.com. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, stay perverted.